Hello! You have no idea how many times I've recorded the same video, only to just decide it's not good enough. So I'm giving it another shot, and I want your help with it. So let me know how I do in the comments. I was about to close it and take another take again, but I just can't be bothered. So, this video is about cameras, and the three main things about cameras: ISO, shutter speed, what's the last one? Aperture. These are the main parts of a camera, and you need to find a balance between these three. They kind of do the same thing, but in very different ways. And when you find the right balance, you get stunning photos. You get photos which are suddenly levels better than anything before. And it's so basic, yet the results are shocking. I'm going to start off by giving a bit more context about what cameras are. Well, firstly, we'll jump into a bit of physics. What is light? We know that light is why we see things around us, but how is it actually possible? When you think about it from the perspective of physics, it's like a particle. Think about one wavelength of light. Think of it as a ray initially. Now think of that ray as a particle. I'm emitting light or reflecting light into the camera, particle by particle. Now, if you think of it as particles, and this gives you vision, the number of particles that you can collect gives you more data to work with, and more data means happier you because you've got a better photo. At least, that's in most cases. Now, here is where ISO comes in. ISO just means the sensitivity of the sensor. Sorry. The sensor is basically, it eats these particles of light, or it stores them. I like to think of it like a well. If you think about adding a bucket of water, and one bucket of water is 1 photon of light, the more full your well is, the more data you have to work with it. This seems good, right? But sometimes it can make our photos oversaturated. Not always though, depending on how sensitive we are to each bucket. Sensitivity can be seen as, if I put one bucket of water in the well, how full does the well get? If the well is full after one bucket, that's really sensitive. Meanwhile, if I put one bucket of water into the well and it's only full by 1%, that's not very sensitive. In most cases, you want to be working with lower sensitivities, because this means that you have more data to collect, and that lets you get a sharper picture in general. However, if you're working in low light settings, where there's not much water buckets to work with, if we continue using that analogy, that means that we need to be more sensitive. We want to fill up the buckets faster, because there's just not that much water to work with. Meanwhile, if it's in daylight, we want to have less sensitivity, because too much and the well will overflow. And when we take a photo, it's just going to be fully white. That's not what we want at all. Now, another tool we can use to help us with making this very, very fine decision between what's right and what's just too much. We can use shutter speed. Shutter speed is how long the shutter stays open for. For example, if I'm an athlete and someone's taking a photo of me, if I'm running and they have a shutter speed on for a second, I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be gone by the time that they actually take the photo. And what ends up in the photo is that it's just a really blurred photo of me dashing across the entire screen. We don't want that. Well, sometimes it can look nice. For example, street photography. However, we also need to find right case uses for those settings. If we're taking a photo at a sports event, we want to have shutter speed to be rather fast. But because it's so fast, not much light is going to get through. Think of it like closing the gate on a flow of water. If you close the gate too quickly, not much water actually can pass through the gates. Meanwhile, if you leave them open for ages, maybe your entire castle gets flooded. We need to find the right balance between this. And it depends on your scenario. Sometimes you can't change the shutter speed too much. For example, if you're taking photos at a sports event, the shutter speed will need to be rather fast to make sure that there's no blur when you're taking the photos. But this also means that there is less data to work with. Hence, your ISO would need to be adjusted to be a bit more sensitive, so that you have a bit more data to work with. And finally, I'll now talk about aperture. Aperture is essentially it's how wide the lens is and how much light can enter. Now, think of aperture like this. This is counterintuitively, but this is just how convention works. If you have a high aperture, it means that barely any light goes through. Imagine trying to look at something if your eyes are covered by an entire fist and you can't even see anything apart from a tiny hole. That's not going to be good for you because you can't get much data, and it's going to make your field of vision kind of narrow. Of course, that's not actually what happens in a camera, but it's just an analogy. If you instead have a low aperture, it's going to be wider. You can see more, or you can gather more data. This is what we use. We want to get as high for aperture as possible usually, because this gives us more data to work with. Once again, it depends on your scenario. If it's a sunny day and you have a high aperture, high ISO, and high shutter speed, it's just gonna go wrong. You're gonna have nothing distinguishable in your photo at all. Hence, we use these three settings and find the right mix. For astrophotography, you will always want to have a high aperture. Aperture is dependent on your camera, and it's also dependent on your lens. Lenses are more important in this case, because they mark how much the aperture is. Like, for example, if I fit a 5.6 f5.6 aperture lens on my camera, I can't suddenly tell the camera, go lower, I want more light. It just doesn't work that way. Hence, we need to make that trade-off and find a right lens for us. I hope this has helped. Thank you.